Hey Wizards, welcome back as always. Now, I'm pretty excited to bring you today's video. I know I say it on every single one, but as you likely know what this video is because you clicked on the title of it, this is probably the coolest thing I've ever had the chance to show you on this channel. We all got teased by Nocturne with this at SHOT Show last year, and I think pretty much all of you are just as excited to see this as I am. That new product we'll deep dive into is the all-new Nocturn UAP NVG, or the Chimera Panoramic Night Vision Goggle. Using this and testing it, it's even crazier than I would have ever imagined, and it's just wild to see it and have it in my hands after following the development of this product for like the past 3 years. We also have the maybe I think it's the only one that exists, the first production run of the Chimera. And we have to return this, but if you guys want to see this for yourself, we're going to be taking it back to Nocturne over at SHOT Show. So definitely stop by the Nocturne booth if you're there, if you want to play with the Chimera and then see for yourself what you think. I know I want to hear about it. Now, before we get too far into the weeds and going into all the details, let's take a moment, bring everybody up to speed and talk about what the heck the Chimera even is. Nocturne actually started this project with the Chimera Bridge, having the goal to bring articulation and better end user options to those L3 GPNVGs you would always see in like Call of Duty games. This articulation was just huge because it allowed the weight to be folded backwards and all of the distribution to be more even across the head, instead of having like this big, huge fan of weight just dangling off the front of your face. Or you could rotate the whole system down and just articulate up one pod, so then you can look through an optic or thermal, and we'll test all of that too. But all of the quad night vision that was out during the time had none of this articulation. So moving from binos to quads meant you had a whole lot of different things you had to give up before this bridge existed. And from there, Nocturne kind of realized, well, they could update the whole system instead of just a couple parts here and there to make it better. What would happen if they redid the whole thing? And this was the mantra the Chimera was born around, of improving panoramic night vision with next generation optics, making the whole thing more economically possible, and using standard 18mm tubes with PVS 14 style optics. Meaning you can use whatever tubes you want. Like you could throw an NVT tube in here. I don't know why you would do that, but you certainly could. Or you could use L3, you can use L-bit, you can use Photonis tubes in here. Whereas the L3 GPNVGs had proprietary tubes where you couldn't really mix and match and grow into it, where you can with the Chimera and build into this over time. Basically, in a nutshell, it's all of the new with any of the tubes you want, all with a lifetime warranty. As I said, using it was even crazier than I thought it would be. I'll show you all of it, we'll go through it, and I'll even show you some footage of what it looks like to actually look through pano goggles. It's probably the coolest shit you've ever seen. I'll show you, but first, let's do some sponsor love. Today's video is sponsored in part by Dynamic Principles. Dynamic Principles is defining innovation with products such as their MB3 Battle Belt, with legacy MOLLE that connects into the curved core, or the ability to direct connect cantable pouches, or connect an entire holster systems. Combine that with the ability to swap to any buckle you want, you have a next-gen battle belt that literally does everything. Dynamic Principles, for when you just want the very best. We did a full MB3 loadout where we showed a more military loadout, and then we showed more of a law enforcement loadout, and then we even did a competition loadout. So it was pretty nuts that one belt could do all of that. So if you want to pick up one of those or the amazing DPC plate here, make sure to use discount code TLDco over on the Dynamic Principles website. The guys over at Dynamic Principles have also been geeking out over the Chimera with me, and I just love them. Now though, we also have to talk about biases. I think this is important because I also love Nocturne. The Nocturne guys did send us this very first production Chimera for review, and Nocturne has been a channel sponsor for a long time. So yeah, I have to send it back so others can have an option to have their hands on it too. But it's really awesome of the team to let us have a first crack at it and show it all to you. And I really think those people over there are just fantastic, and I hope to work with them for a very, very long time. I really do enjoy them. All that to say, I'm biased as hell, so don't take anything that I say or any other YouTuber says as gospel. Remember that most of your favorite YouTubers have contracts that they're not even legally allowed to say actually exist, so that should make you ask some hard questions, do your own research, so you can be the most educated consumer possible. I would also recommend you tune into Cold Harbor Media for a different angle than mine, as he'll likely go into more detail of the assembly and construction of the Chimera, and he just does a really great job of explaining it all. But finally, this is the Nocturn Chimera in all of its quad tube glory. Where do I even start? Well, let's go with the housings. As Nocturn noted, the first runs like this one will be machined, and these first SOCOM builds will be made of a magnesium alloy with a special coating to give the highest protection available against saltwater. I'm personally hoping that I don't go in the ocean with these, but they were also coated with the Cerakote to give an added level of protection and also give a more uniform finish that you kind of see over the whole year. Talking to Nocturn also, all of the first limited run will be in the SOCOM configuration that also includes the battery-powered bridge that I'll explain more to as we get to that piece. The machined housings are about 31 ounces just for the housing and with the battery-powered bridge. And there's also going to be an injection molded version later that Jeff talked about during a SHOT Show video, with the injection molded housing being about 27.5 ounces. Just be aware they're just now getting started on that, and from what I understand, that tooling and all that takes a long amount of time. So I would imagine 2027 or 2028 for that version. Just me guessing though. Now at the rear of the Chimera, we also see how the housing overlaps the optic in the rear just slightly to give a standoff from the housing to the optic glass itself. The L3 GPNVGs apparently didn't have this, and it's one of many improvements we're going to see that really makes the Chimera stand out. Whereas if you're wearing glasses or goggles, you don't have to worry about when you lower your goggles down and your glasses slamming into the optics and damaging them. It seems like a small thing, but if you're out there jumping out of airplanes, the last thing you want is some huge scratch in your lens just because they hit your goggles or something weird. So it's really pretty smart that they thought of this. Very, very cool. Just a small, tiny thing. Now, the rear of the glass is truncated RPO 4.0 glass. We see some huge improvements over GPNVGs here to give you a more seamless transition between the two optics, and also increasing eye relief, like for that standoff, and less vignetting to give you a cleaner and clearer view. We'll do a whole image test at the end, but this rear glass is the amazing part that it does some craziness, and it's what Nocturne was waiting for so long on. I say that because the whole Chimera was just iterations and iterations of prototypes until they got this glass nailed down, and it's just awesome to see what they've done with the RPO team to really, really nail this. I promise you're going to be impressed. But at the front is also the RPO 3.0 objective lenses that are included with the price of the Chimera. I've used these with my Manticore R, and they are great at weight savings. Nocturne did also say that as soon as RPO releases the 4.0 lenses, like for commercial release, they're going to be including those standard on the Chimera. So it's a little bit crazy to think that you're going to see the image quality, and just know that later on that image is going to be even better. And I think that whole thing's a little bit nuts. Now, as Nocturne aimed to do in the original design mantra, the optics are standard PVS 14 style. So you could, in theory, swap these out to mil-spec Carson glass or anything else compatible with the rear truncated lenses. Those mil-spec optics like the Carson glass would be very, very heavy though, particularly when you talk about doing 4 of them. So no, I don't recommend doing that. The only time I would ever do that is if I was recording through the night vision, but it's so much more difficult to do that on quads that I don't think the human eye is going to tell much of a difference, particularly with the 4.0s. I know there's some other optics like the boom slangs or like the 50-degree optics. I think that would do a whole lot of weird stuff, particularly with the truncated lenses here. So I don't recommend you do that. And I'm pretty sure Nocturne even says that those ones are not compatible with this system. Now, as we noted earlier, the Chimera also uses standard 18mm intensifier tubes inside this housing. So like I said, instead of using super expensive proprietary tubes like on the GPNVG, you can instead cannibalize maybe your Bino setup or maybe a set of PVS 14s and slowly build into a full Chimera setup if you wanted to do that. That whole design mantra means you have options to build like the most budget quad setup you want to do, or put in like 3,000 FOM tubes if you wanted to do that. You get to decide based off your budget, and you can also change it later. It's all just normal tubes. But since it's all using standard PBS-14 optics and 18mm illuminators, that means any dealer can also repair or refurbish the Chimera. I wasn't actually aware of this and had to be told about it, but apparently the L3 GPNVGs are so proprietary that you had to send them in to like an L3 qualified repair technician, which I'm sure costs an epic boatload. And instead with the Chimera, you get standard parts. I mean, yeah, there's kind of a fancy rear lens, but any dealer can work on it. And it's pretty awesome to have that forward thinking from Nocturn to not only think about the initial purchase, but also think of the lifetime of the product from the end user aspect. Now, another huge improvement we see is the connection to the bridge itself. Instead of a single polymer dovetail and screw, we have 4 screws to clamp down the pod and bridge tightly together for a watertight and far more rugged connection. I'm not cool enough to play with GPNVGs, but from what I understand, each of the pods only had like a dovetail and single screw. So I'm curious from all of you that have used it, if you thought that connection system was good or bad. I want to hear more about it. But the 4 screws are stout as hell and connect into the IPD system. Here the knobs on the side rotate to bring the 2 images to the left or to the right of your eye, so you can line it up with the center, kind of like VR, with an end result similar to aligning dual tubes. At the rear, you can also see the detent that locks the arm in the stowed position, and there is another that locks it in the deployed position, so they won't just fall down on your face when you're jumping around. This was a problem that apparently SOCOM wanted them to solve, where people who are out on high seas would just have their nods just slam back down onto their face, so the detent prevents that. And also, if you're jumping from a parachute, when you go to deploy it, they won't just suddenly come down and they instead stay in position on the detent. They work really, really well. I think my back would just hurt me forever if I did either of those things, but we will do a stowage and articulation test at the end to see how these compare to like monocular PBS-14s or like dual nod systems. The detent pin is also epoxied in place, so this isn't an adjustment you probably want to mess with. The 2 pods themselves are connected in similarly to the Daisho bridge, Manicore, and all the others. So you could, in theory, adjust pod tension. The tension does come set from the factory, and if you've ever messed with the Daisho bridge, you know that there's a sweet spot where it's not too tight and it's not too loose. That perfect setting is how it comes to you. So I don't recommend you mess with this, but yes, you could. Moving to the center next, we have the powered bridge. This takes a Sierra 123 battery, and here I'll show you the orientation for installation. And this setup powers the unit for about 10 to 12 hours. Along the bottom, we also see the LEMO 2-pin port for external power, and this entire plate can be swapped out for a flush or Fisher 4-pin. Just know the LEMO 2-pin port comes standard, and personally, I just want whatever the crap I need to connect into this silly rail link port. When connected into the bat pack for rear power, you get 48 hours of runtime on top of that 10 to 12 for the installed battery. Now, I do want to share that the battery at the front has to be installed even with external power. This is due to the boot sequence being done by the battery and then swapping via logic circuits to the external power pack as it turns on. So there is the tiniest bit of power draw that happens in the main battery every time you turn this on. And I asked Nocturn what this was. They were like, dude, Walsh, that draw is so low that you could probably turn it on like 1,000,000 times with that battery. So it's not an issue at all if you want to use an external battery pack. Now, if you're like me, you also see the opportunity for weight savings here by ditching that battery and only going to external power. So I asked Nocturn why they went with this specific configuration. And interestingly, this was a SOCOM requirement, as they didn't want members in the dark if their cable got cut or snagged with no way to bring the Chimera back online. Hearing that makes sense that those SOCOM units would want to have a battery backup system in place, because this unit is far more designed for like special forces units and not necessarily for people like me, idiots in their yard So kind of just sit there, smiled and nodded and was like, yep, that makes sense. Along the top of the bridge, you also have some nice large hooks for lanyard retention, and I have to say that these are great. And then we wrap it all up with the dovetail connection along the top. Going over it and talking about every single little piece, there's definitely kind of a holy crap level of things going on here. But let's be completely honest, we've barely even gotten started. So let me show you a couple tests. Now I want to show you the image quality test first because I want to show you what it's like to look through these knobs, like what you actually see when you look through the Chimera. But it's very difficult to capture both the image and how it looks functionally. So let's do this one first. Looking through our left pod, you can see an absolutely amazing image. These are the 4G Photonis high gains, so not even the best you can buy, and this is just ridiculous. The camera has a hard time capturing it perfectly, but the two lenses just barely overlap to give you that figure eight of both images to make it a clean and continuous image through the truncated lenses. This is a stark difference when you see the GP and VGs, where the two tubes have a lot more space between them and the whole image isn't nearly as clean with that old glass. The glass, the time they spent here, just really contributes to that holy crap moment you get when you first put these on. Now though, I think one of the more popular questions and what everybody wants to know, what's it like to actually look through the Nocturn Chimera? And let me show you. First, I gotta explain, this is what's shown to the eyes. 4 images that make a cohesive scene of the entire area. You can see how all 4 tubes make this possible, but this is not what your brain shows you. Let me explain what's happening with an example. Take your thumb out and put it really, really close, like really, really close to your face, and then close one eye and then the other. And if you're following along, you see 2 very, very different images. But if you open your eyes, you suddenly see one cohesive image where your brain melded those 2 pictures together into one image. Much like binocular housings, your brain blends the center tubes into one, which is just about impossible to capture, but this is more so what you see. One center image with image depth due to the stereoscopic viewing, and then another image to the left and to the right of those 2 center overlaid images. It's kind of hard to relate to people that you only see 3 tubes, but that center tube isn't missing. It's just adding depth to the image in the center tubes. Very much like how binocular night vision, or just binoculars, take those 2 images and turn them into a single one. But then you have the 2 images that are on either side of that center tube. Just be aware that your brain is seeing and making sense of all 4 images that the Chimera is feeding it, but then it's only showing you 3 tubes. And understanding that and knowing how it kind of works and what you're expected to see, I can explain a little bit more about how to set the IPD stops. Make sure everything is mounted and aligned, but then bring those 2 center images together so they form one. You'll see what I mean when you're doing it, and then the 2 side images will fall in place to give you a super clean panoramic view. That should get you pretty close to where you need to be. I would just tell you what the IPD stop setting is, but it's different for every single person as we all have different faces, different face sizes, so you have to play with it a little bit. Now though, let's go into the next test and try out this actual stowage and articulation. From just articulating the Chimera up like legacy GP and VGs, this sucks. You can instantly see what inspired the Nocturn guys, as this configuration feels like I'm wearing a weighted fan on my head. Folding the pods back onto their detent, this is a ton more comfortable, and it balances the weight so it doesn't feel like my neck is trying to explode. Now, from a comparison standpoint, I think my Manicore R and PVS 14 stowage is like a 10 out of 10. It sits comfortably, it's not bulky, and you barely know it's there. With the Chimera, I give the non-articulating, like the old flip-up garbage, a solid 4. It's horrible. But then I give the folded pod an 8 or 8.5 in terms of comfort and bulk, if that helps to give you a reference of what the difference is. Flipping the Chimera back down, this isn't quite as nice, but it certainly works for use with a weapon system or thermal, when you want to use one pod for night vision and the other one looking through an optic or weapon system. And that's something we've seen a lot of guys teaching in CQB classes where they have one pod or one set of night vision flipped up so that main, I'm left-handed, so that main eye is already set up to transition to white light, but you still have night vision in your other eye. And yes, you can still do that with duals. It's very, very popular. With the Chimera, you have an entire second tube to add into your peripheral view, like off that side of your face, instead of having just that single toilet paper tube worth of information where you continually have to scan around. Plus, I really like being able to flip up one pod and scan with a thermal or just run straight thermal rifle sights. I think from an articulation test standpoint, I really like it from a comfort side, but also it lets you do some completely nutso stuff from the tactical side. For the next test, we have weight, and the magnesium version comes in at around 890 grams with the battery installed, since you have to have it in there for it to work. The injection molded version will be about 100 grams lighter, which I think is what's listed on the Nocturn website for current weights, or if you were checking the weight of this unit. So that's going to be the weight of it when it's in its final production version. Like I said, though, all of that takes time and tooling and all that. So I would realistically aim for 2027 or 2028 for that injection molded version and the magnesium as the standard as of right now. That's all the main tests, though, and that's the whole unit. So let's do some pros and cons. The first big one is you can see everything. The first moments with the Chimera are intuitive and awesome. Your brain quickly adapts to the changes to give you a far larger field of view, so you're not having to move your head around on a swivel just to navigate and avoid obstacles. Using a system like this is so much easier to navigate around tight spaces. And for low light, room clearing, I highly, highly recommend this because you have such a larger field of view. You can easily see behind those doors or into those deep corners without having to pan around all over the place. It is just wonderful to use. The second big pro that I have is the articulation. This is just what makes the whole thing great. The pod stowage is certainly the icing on the cake. Being able to fold them back when articulated upward just feels great on your head. Having the pods up when deployed also means you can easily drive a vehicle. It's also insanely easy to use passive aiming on the Chimera, or just throw up one pod to be set up for white light transitions when things get lead and loud. Now, I could probably talk about pros on this thing all day because I'm just geeking out, but let's harp on one last huge one, the glass. Here is where Nocturn and RPO just nailed it, giving you a better eye relief, a better standoff to protect the glass, and blending those images so it's almost seamless. You can tell this is what Nocturn wanted to get right, and it paid off in spades as it's just phenomenal to see and use. Any person I've given these to has just commented on how insanely nuts the whole system is. Now, everything that has some pros should also have cons, and it does have a few. The first one I'll comment on is the weight. The SOCOM version has some features that make sense for that Special Forces end user, but I found myself dreaming for the injection molded version with an external power only model to connect into a lightweight rail link configuration. I'm betting you could shave off more than 100 grams, and at that point, you're almost at the same weight as like those super janky dual PVS-14 setups, and at that point, I would use this in lieu of any other system. I get it though, they're doing the first run. This is the machine version where they're getting all the tooling and sizing correctly. And I know for those specific SOCOM end users, that battery pack is going to be far, far more valuable to them. So I get this whole configuration. And I think those Special Forces users are just gonna love the focus on, the added power, the salt water. I'm going to stay out of the ocean, but they're going to just love this thing as much as I do. Now, the only other con I would really harp on is the elephant in the room. Yeah, it's the price, but it's also, you got to think relatively, it's also a pro because this is less than half of the current offerings that are on the market. You could go as low as like 15,000 robots or go as crazy as like 30,000 robots. It really just depends on how crazy you as the end user want to go. But either way, you're saving a whole lot of robots over the other version that I think is inferior at this point. But with all that, pros, cons, testing, you see it all, and having the best time of my life, what are my final thoughts and ranking? The Nocturn Chimera is a textbook lesson in patience. We're spending the time to do everything right, paid off in huge dividends. From the glass, to the articulation, to the standard PVS 14 optics and intensifier tubes. We see the next generation of quad night vision where you can literally see and do more than you ever could with duals, giving you far more for less than what's on the market. Every test I did just made me want to do more, and the Nocturn Chimera was amazing, and I gave it a solid S+ rating. The only thing that's cooler than how it looks is actually using it, and that is pretty wild. I really loved using the Chimera, and to be honest, I was a little bit worried at the beginning, and I initially didn't gut my Manicore R. I didn't pull those tubes to put in a Manicore setup because I didn't know if it would be practical. And it kind of begs the question, is a Chimera the right option for you? We'll do some follow-up videos soon and explore that and compare singles, duals, and quads so you can better make that decision for yourself. Now that there's panoramic night vision that's at least within sane levels of cost, I think there's some valuable information I can give you that will really help you make that decision and see what would be the best option for you, particularly when you're spending that much money. Hopefully by then I have my own Chimera in hand, and maybe by then I figured out how to hook it to the rail link. But I hope this review of the Nocturn Chimera was helpful in your purchasing decisions. I want to say thanks to all of our YouTube and Patreon members. You guys make it possible that we can do insane things like this, show you night vision like this, and let you know if it's worth your money. I'll tell you right now, it absolutely is. And I want to say thanks to everyone that likes, comments, and subscribes. Comment down below what you think about the Chimera, and I kind of know the answer, but if you think you need to pick one up, I know you probably do, but maybe your wife says you don't. I want to hear about it though. All right, everyone, bullshit out. Jeff did also mention they were going to do a manual gain version. I find that's interesting because you often want manual gain. I know we're going to talk more technical stuff. You often want manual gain on duals because you still have your peripheral view. So you want to have it low enough where you keep your night vision. But what's interesting is you lose the majority of your peripheral view. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what it is. Maybe just to keep your night vision so you can go from stowed to whatever and still have your night vision without having to readjust. That actually does make sense to me. All right, everybody, I gotta go. If you want to see this particular unit itself, I think there's going to be some cool other things they're going to add into it at SHOT Show. I don't even know what it's going to be, but stop by the booth. I'll be there too at some point. See these. All right, I'm gonna go.